Welcome to Farm Here Daily, a field forward podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger. Today on Farm Here Daily, there has still been virtually no soybean sales to China. Iowa farmer April Hemis joins us to talk about the difficulties facing farmers this harvest season. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining me on Farm Here Daily, we are going to take a look at the soybean farmer. To do so, we have April Hemis. She is an Iowa soybean farmer. You've also been with the Iowa Soybean Association, the United Soybean Board, all over the place, helping talk about important soybean producer issues. April, it's so glad to have you on the program. And tell me, how's harvest going? What are you up to right now?
Well, I just jumped off the combine. I just finished a field of corn, and it's doing surprisingly better than I thought. And yes, I sprayed fungicide, but it's the genetics are amazing because we had disease all over in our corn in Iowa. So it's doing good, and hopefully start beans this afternoon. They were still kind of mushy a couple days ago. So I'm going to go give them the bite test after I'm done with you, and we'll see how it goes.
I want to definitely dive into soybeans because you brought up corn there with fungicide. I was just speaking with a plant pathologist the other day, and we were talking about how crazy some yields are if they were a hybrid that was not well suited for soybean rust or some of the other diseases, and B, right, hit heavily by it, and how many bushels it saved a fungicide application this year.
Yes, fungicide's one of those things, and I spray it on beans too, so I can't compare with or without, but it has been the first year I ever used it, and I can't remember when it was 13 bushel better. And I said, okay, I get it. Yeah, I can do that. Some years it pays, some years it doesn't. But the one guy did not spray his headlands, and he showed pictures, and we're all going, ew. So yeah. So it's just become one of those things you just, right into your cash flow and do it. And then another thing is in my county, I'm in Franklin County, north central Iowa. We had the second wettest July on record and a very hot record. So that makes for that old disease triangle: hot, wet, you just need the host, which was corn, and the pathogens. So it all came together. So I'm surprised I'm running as good as I am. So
we were very dry this year for the last 2 months, but we started off super, super wet.
Yep.
And yep. I was looking at some of the places.
Don't like wet feet.
No, they don't. They really don't. Some of our neighbors are not getting as good of a time with the dryness. It is actually much, much drier in some places. Yes. I was hearing some 7% beans going on around in our neighbors.
Yeah, my neighbor, I'm a farmer. I go to coffee every morning. They were running yesterday, and it was 10%. My problem is I interplanted some because it was so wet, and then it got cold, and so some came up, some didn't. A lot of corn got replanted in my area. Really? But so and then the germination was just random. So we'll see. Hopefully the dry and the wet mixed together, and I'll magically have 13 and 14% soybeans this afternoon.
Right. So. You'll have to tell me about that this afternoon, hopping back in the combine. I did want to bring up a tougher subject facing soybean farmers right now, and that is what we are dealing with the lack of Chinese trade, and not just the lack of Chinese trade.
It's everything everywhere all at once is what I'm calling it.
Everything everywhere all at once. And I think it kind of goes to show that China, I guess, learned a lesson from the last Trump administration, and they really 100%. Diversified where they were buying beans from. And we kind of saw that with the Argentinians deciding to remove their tax on that. I actually talked to Argentinians last year, and they could not complain enough about the taxes that they have to pay. So of course they start selling big time, and that's affecting us. Maybe domestically, not as much, but we can talk about that first. Let's just talk about that demand side. What are you seeing as a soybean farmer?
Well, they're just, like I've said, we're lucky here in Iowa. We have a lot of I have a Cargill crush plant 10 miles away, and they do biodiesel too. So we do a lot of crushing and feeding of soybeans and soybean meal in Iowa. But my poor North Dakota farmer friends and some in South Dakota and Minnesota, they're not even taking them. I just talked to one the other day, and they said, unless you have a contract, forget it. You're not bringing them in. And $1.70 to $1.80 basis under.
Wow.
So
Wow.
you're already losing money on soybeans, and then they have that to go along with them. The ones I've talked to said, luckily I have storage, but they have friends who don't have storage. What do? You can't deliver it, and I don't know how well soybeans handle winters in North Dakota, but they don't handle winters in Iowa very well. So, but that's part of it. And then, right, the Chinese have had a few years, 4 years, to build up and redo where they get things from. Well, that forced us to go other places, to sell our soybeans, which was great. But we're crushing a lot for the oil, for renewable diesel and biodiesel. Well, 80% of that, or a little less than 80%, is meal. So we needed that meal. Well, Argentina is the biggest meal, exporter in the world. And then when I read that, I could have hung my head and cried. I went, well, there it goes.
Right.
Now China can really play the long game. They were playing the long game with President Trump before this administration, and they really will now, because they're covering their needs for November, December. That window's closing for when Brazil will have their beans. So that's why I said, and then the tariffs are also affecting our inputs. It's, last time it was just what we sold. Right. It's not what we bought. And now with the fertilizer and the chemicals and the parts we need and everything like that, the tariffs on that has made everything go higher.
Right. Last time we had the tariffs, and then after the tariffs, COVID hit, and that's when fertilizer prices went up. So it's kind of like boom, boom. And now we have both of them at once at the same time. Exactly. And, I was thinking about that basis under you're talking about, and that is not 20% under the cost is not even close to margins as far as I understand. What are farmers even going to do for soybeans in those areas where they don't have that domestic demand and they need a lot of travel expenses?
Yeah, I don't know. That's the problem, is that, and
it's a good answer sometimes.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't know, because I have been talking to them, and I keep saying, you guys, I'm really trying to tell your story, the North, right? Because everything. Well, what I failed to mention, what they produce there, if it's exported, goes out the Pacific Northwest to where? China, Southeast Asia, and everywhere else that we're and the tariffs are there. So it's just a tough. It's tough. And I've talked to a guy talked to some barge people and said barges are full up and down the Mississippi. There's something else. So it's not just the farmers. You have to think the broader ag picture. And the ag world is hurting right now. That's no kidding.
Let's kind of take an urban-rural divide bridge here.
Yep.
And I'm thinking someone who has no engagement with farm will look at this situation and go, well, it's not like anyone was choosing to produce more and more soybeans this year. So if China doesn't buy from us, they're buying from other people, and those other people were selling to other people. And why can't we just sell to those people? And nothing changed in that way. Why is China so important? What's kind of your general thoughts on that?
So we did develop other markets when the phase one was being negotiated, which people tend to forget that took years to do. So when they said, oh, we're going to have an agreement right away, I went, yeah, no, we're not. So,
we can't even get a farm bill. It's been 7 years.
Exactly. Realistically, no. So those other, the demand is there, and they will still come to us. But when you're talking China, in Iowa, it used to be 1 out of every 3 soybean rows went to China. I think now it's still 1 out of every 4. And even when we went through this the first time, China was still the largest buyer of soybeans by double. And then you take that and take it to 0, there's not enough other demand to make up for that.
Right, because it was unknown destinations. They were buying it. They
Right.
just weren't China
Yeah,
buying
they were
it
taking
on
it
the,
through
yeah,
wherever. Yeah, Vietnam or wherever. Yeah, right. So, and so you still wonder what the unknown destinations are because they
yeah.
still do that. But
But it's not
I
at the same level. I remember looking at
no,
the unknown destinations. That was top in the charts
100%. Right,
back in
right.
that first Trump administration. And now I think I looked at it today, it was number 4.
Yeah. So you still, it's just China just saying we can play this game, and until, I just read something today until the tariffs are gone, they won't buy soybeans, and they're making it so they don't have to. And they will need to eventually, I would hope, but they're doing everything possible, finding other feedstocks and things like that, to get them through, to get them by. So, and honestly, if I was Brazil, I'd be more scared because all of their soybeans go there. At least we have other options. You know what
Right.
I mean?
Yeah.
It's hurting us, but Brazil's tied to them now. So, but yeah, it's just with the high inputs, with everything all at once, and everyone's comparing it to the 80s. And quite honestly, I came home and started farming in the 80s, and we had interest in the teens, but our inputs were low. Our interest was high, but the inputs were low. You could scrape by, and it's just it's crazy times, David.
It is crazy times, and to touch on the interest, just for more general information, I know the housing interest rates have risen as I have purchased houses over the past couple of years. I bought and sold a house that was at 3%, which was great, and
Yeah,
then I
until you
bought and sold a
refinance.
house that was at 8%,
Right.
and that was in a span of 4 years. What's it looking like on the farm front? How are you able to leverage what often is not liquid cash?
Right, right. You be really nice to your banker. So,
Bring him a box of chocolates or something.
yes, yeah. No, you have to you just have to be honest with them. They know it's going to be tough, and I share probably not too much, but I talk a lot with my bankers and also give them information. This is what I'm hearing. This is what's going on, because the more that ag bankers inform, the more they'll understand, what we're all going through. And many of these bankers only know that 3% interest. They've never
Wow.
had to deal with anything higher. So, and then you have to figure in the cost of storage. I was just listening to a podcast about that. A lot of farmers go, well, we'll put it in the bin and forget it. No, that's costing you money. If you're borrowing that 8-9% line of credit, that's still costing you money. So there's a lot of things that go into play in deciding what we're going to do. Do we just market it and, take our loss, least less loss? Is that
Right.
even a thing? But yeah, but and put to bed some of that interest. Or a lot of guys are going, I need cash now. Their line of credits are out, they need cash now. I'm one of those. Because, well, they made me buy the
It's not
nitrogen.
funny. It's not funny.
No,
I'm
I
laughing because
know.
it's
No,
sad. Yeah.
I know. No, the nitrogen I always pay for in August, or I always lock it in August and pay for it. And now they're like, we need a check in our hand now.
Yeah.
And so they're locking in what they can do.
Because you're buying
And
next year's inputs already. You have to do it
I'm
now.
buying next year's inputs, and usually I have enough left on my old line to put it on there, and I'm like, I can't do it. So we had to write a little short-term note. And yeah, but my banker's night, he goes, you need to borrow more than that. He goes, I need to borrow some money. So that's how much these farmers are shutting down.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
just
I don't know what the next step is for some of those things. I don't think many people do, but what are you talking to folks about? What are you encouraging in terms of change? Because as you already said, we are already locked in terms of China all the way through
right,
November and maybe even
right.
December, right? That leaves less than 2 months of marketing for our new crop before Brazil starts rolling out. So what are we to do? We already have missed the gateway, the the sounding
Right, for the
race
marketing,
alarm. Yeah.
right, yeah. So, everybody's talking about the payments, government payments. And I have never been a proponent of that because it's a vicious cycle we're in. And they've done study upon study where 75 to 80% of that money does not go to me. It goes to the fertilizer, the chemicals, the seed. It goes to everyone else because they're not going to, the landlords, if they know you're going to get a payment, well, then they've got their hands out. They want part of it. So,
Right. They're not going to
that,
lower their prices out of charity.
and no, that's a frustrating part. And the fertilizer people, I was told this might be some of my fertilizer. The phosphorus, NP and K that we need for our corn, made in Florida. Well, where's the other place? Morocco. They're going to get tariff. So, do you think the people making the fertilizer in Florida are going to lower their prices? Heck no.
It's a more fair price now, because it was a big push. That was, I think, a couple years ago, a big push to put tariffs on them because they were operating unfairly, allegedly. And I think the government agreed with them, so that's why we're doing it. But now when input prices are so high, that's not
Yeah,
really helpful to the farmer.
no. So, yeah. Wow, way to take their side, David. Jeez.
No, I'm not taking theirs. I'm saying that's not
No, I
helpful
know.
to the farmer. Yeah.
Well, no, right. But then, that's just it. Nothing is coming down. So, yes, my banker said, well, it's going to be easier if you do get a payment, which now he floated the pay the farmers with the tariffs. Well, the Congress has to approve that. What if Congress says no? Then the administration can blame Congress for making the farmers mad. I mean, we're really caught in the middle of everything
Yeah.
anyway. So and we've been through it before, so we're used to this, but not when everything is coming down on us like it is now.
Right.
So,
I mean, what happens if, worst case scenario, we start seeing a rise in farm bankruptcies? We see a reduction in what farmers are capable of doing because they can't afford to pay the inputs, which would reduce their yields, which would reduce their margins, which then makes
well,
next year even harder.
right. And that's what a lot of these companies that have input said, well, the farmers are going to yield their way out of it. Well, not this year in Iowa, they're not. So,
Yeah, that was a June projection.
Illinois, yeah, and Iowa and Illinois are, yeah. That's the talk from the farmers. It's like, no, that's not going to happen. But so it's we have to, it's just this whole thing that we've been caught up in, and the way I can see many farmers my age and older that have just been, it hasn't been so bad the past few years, but they're going to go, I'm not going to blow through my assets just to keep farming, So I could see some on the older side, 65 plus, just getting out of it now, or next year, because frankly, next year's not going to be any better. Not,
How
no.
We've obviously talked about how this is an urgent issue, but how would you characterize the urgency that this level of topic deserves at the, priority levels of what all the things that are going on on the national front of politics and decision making?
The farmers I've talked to said, because they know I talk to people, talk about the cost of inputs. That is number one on top of the farmers' minds. We've been used to having highs and lows in prices, and we can manage that. But when we don't even have a chance to sell, I have sold nothing ahead, and I'm always 20 to 30%. But when the only price you can get to sell ahead is you at a known loss, do I want to sit and cross my fingers and, oh, I really hope it gets better? No, I don't. But there's not a whole lot of chances. So it's the cost of inputs. I know they're doing something about fertilizer now. They're looking into that. That's a start, but, and somebody asked me about policy, and I go, it just seems like the more policy we put into place, the more things, wheels fall off the bus along the way. So I don't know what the answer is. I can just tell you how we're doing out on the farm. But it's just everything. It's just the tariffs have just because it's not just what we're selling, it's what we're buying. It's that double-edged sword.
Right.
And that's what makes it far worse for the farmers.
What are your thoughts dealing with input costs? What are you recommending then in terms of, I know kind of the big three would be fertilizer, seed, and protection, whether it's insurances or
Land cost
chemicals
is
to protect.
everybody's biggest
Yes.
cost.
Land,
Right.
land costs,
Yeah.
land cost as well. Absolutely. So
Yeah. Yeah.
four big ones. Of those, what can be worked with? Because I know there are plenty of agriculture companies that would argue that they aren't doing very well either because the
Right.
farmer
Yeah.
isn't doing very well.
Yeah. The John Deeres of the world are not doing very well. I agree. And that's what I always say. If farmers are doing good, rural America is doing good. Because we don't take that extra cash and go buy a bunch of crap on Amazon. We go to the implement dealer or we go to the car dealer. It's spent locally, whether you're fixing up a barn or whatever. So the input costs on farmers' minds are really number one. That's what we're looking at, and what can we cut and still do a good job farming and get those yields? What is the extra thing we can do to just start whittling away at the cost of production? So that's for next year. That's what we're talking about.
So is there a general call then among associations, groups, and farmers to political leaders to say, hey, we got to deal with this? Is this something that is really being talked about? I don't hear too much being spoken out loud in the public, and I have been told by groups that normally these are behind doors type conversations
Yeah.
because you don't want to make anybody upset about like proclamations, etc.
Oh, yeah. Well, when my sister, who works in a cafeteria in St. Olaf in Faribault, Minnesota, calls me and says, "What? China isn't buying any soybeans? None whatsoever?" Like, the word's getting out there, the story is out there, but what's being done, yes, is it's a start with what Senator Grassley did in getting that fertilizer. I think the DOJ is now looking into that, the fertilizer costs. So, it's start, but I wish I could say ag was the only thing on their minds in DC right now, but they've got chaos going on there too. Oh, can I say that out loud?
Yeah, you can say that.
I bet I'll be censored now, though. So that's
I think chaos is a perfully apt description of Washington D.C. at all times in all administrations.
well, that's true. Yes. For those of us in rural America, you go, what? But
by comparison, yes.
Yeah, very much so. So a lot of that is, and it is honestly farmers taking time off of their farm, getting out of their combine and going and pleading their story, to the lawmakers and to the people, the powers that be. Hey, we've got a serious problem out here. So I think it's really starting to gain momentum now, and they're hearing it. So that's always good, because when you figure we're less than 1% of the population, so
yeah, it's around there,
tiny, so we have to have pretty loud voices to be heard.
Absolutely. April, well, I know it's a tough time for you guys, folks on the farm, but I do really appreciate you telling your story here today, and I really wish you the best this harvest. May you have many good yields ahead, especially this afternoon with your soybeans, starting those. I appreciate that. April Emes is an Iowa farmer, also has been a part of the Iowa Soybean Association as well as the United Soybean Board. Really appreciate your time today on Farm Your Daily.
Thanks for having me.
This is Farm Your Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again on Monday. Have a good weekend, everybody.